Good evening, everybody. I hate to interrupt the conversations. That's what it should be about. But and also, I should say, it's funny. It doesn't look like a June audience. There's something about the weather out there that's quite ridiculous. I guess only in Cape Cod do we say June showers bring July flowers, right? My name is Bob Rindler. I'm a member of PAAM. I serve on the Education Committee at the Provincetown Art Association and Museum, and it's my honor to welcome you to the first Freddie Schiff Levin Lecture of the 2009 season with Rachel Rosenfield Lafo, the curator of the exhibition Tabitha Vevers, Narrative Bodies. We'll hope you join us for the next lecture at PAAM on Tuesday, June 23rd, a gallery talk with the artist Pat de Groot in conjunction with her exhibition, Window to the Sea, Birds, Light, and Water. This lecture series began in 2003 in honor of the artist Freddie Schiff Levin, who was a member of Provincetown's arts community from the 1960s until her passing in 2002. PAAM gratefully acknowledges John and Tony Levin and Mildred and Herbert Lee, who have made this program possible with their generous support. We'd like to take this opportunity to convey our sadness and sympathy to the Lee and Levin families regarding the passing of Mildred Lee this year. She will be greatly missed and long remembered. We'd also like to thank Angel Foods for their continued support and for another fabulous cheese platter, as well as Snug Cottage. Please help yourself to refreshments and visit Angel Foods every time you come to PAAM, located directly across the street. And now on to tonight's presentation, Tabitha Vevers, Narrative Bodies with Rachel Rosenfield Lafo. Narrative Bodies is a mid-career survey exhibition of the work of painter Tabitha Vevers, who divides her time between Cape Cod and Cambridge, Massachusetts. Creating personal narratives that explore the female body and sexuality, Vevers uses old master techniques on an intimate scale to address socio-political issues that include war, AIDS, environmental degradation, the relationship of the sexes, and women's historical positions in society. The artist was initially compelled to paint in the late 70s by a desire to take the female nude back from art history and portray her with the complexity of an individual woman's perspective. That's a direct quote from Tabitha. The exhibition explores the development of the artist's work through 60 paintings selected from her different series: Secular Icons, Flesh Memories, Shell Series, Women and Knives, Flying Dreams, Lover's Eyes, and the Eden series. Organized by the Curator Museum and Sculpture Park in Lincoln, Massachusetts, where it premiered from January through May 2009, the exhibition opened at PAAM on June 5th and will be on view through July 19th. It is accompanied by an illustrated catalog that can be purchased at PAAM's bookstore tonight. It's a great catalog. Rachel Rosenfield Lafo served as the Director of Curatorial Affairs at the Curator Museum and Sculpture Park for many years. She has organized numerous exhibitions of contemporary art, authored many catalogs and essays, and has served as a juror, visiting critic, panelist, and lecturer. Her exhibitions and publications include Photography in Boston, 1955 to 1985, Painting in Boston, 1950 to 2000, Presumed Innocence, Photographic Perspectives of Children, Drawn to Detail, and solo exhibitions of the work of Mary Frank, Michael Mazer, Gregory Amanoff, Jerry Bergstein, and many other artists. Lafo has also held positions at the Portland Art Museum, Oregon, and the Center for Conservation and Technical Studies at the Fogg Art Museum at Harvard, and has taught courses in museum administration and curatorship at Tufts University and Boston University. She is currently an independent curator, writer, and art consultant. Please help me welcome Rachel Rosenfield Lafo.
Thank you, Bob, and good evening, everyone. Can you all hear me without this mic? Is everybody? Okay. If that changes, just say so. I'm delighted to be here tonight. I was down here last week actually helping install the show with Tabitha, and in case any of you are wondering why Tabitha herself is not here, it's because I told her she couldn't come. And that's only because I think when you're talking about an artist's work, it's, for me anyway, uncomfortable to have the artist sitting right there. And, you know, if Tabitha were giving her own talk, that would be one thing. But for me to stand here and interpret her work for you, that was my choice. So I think otherwise she might have been in the audience tonight. I want to thank everyone here at PAAM for inviting me and helping me. And there are many people who were involved with the lecture and the installation, as well as the Curator Museum, where I worked for many years, who, as Bob said, did organize the show and publish the catalog, which we're both going to advertise to you. And there were also the lenders to the exhibition, and some of you may be here tonight. I certainly haven't met all the owners of Tabitha's work, but I know that there are many loyal collectors, certainly on the Cape and elsewhere. And if you're in the audience, thank you very much for sharing your work for this exhibition. And there were funders who funded the show, so thank you to all. Has everyone here had a chance to actually see the exhibition?
Oh, yeah.
Yes, not some, maybe not everybody. Well, I hope you will come back, certainly, because it's much better to see the actual work than to see the slides I'm going to show you. And actually, depending on when we finish and how quickly the museum shuts down, I'm happy to go in there and talk to anyone if we have time. When the show was at Curator, and it's fortunately continued here, they did a cell phone tour. So you'll see when you do go into the show that there is a phone number if you wish to, you know, avail yourself of that, where you dial in a number and then you can actually hear Tabitha talking, you know, recorded for the different series. There are different numbers that you key in, and it's a great way to go through the show with the artist, even without her being physically present. So it's more, museums are using these more and more, and it's a great educational benefit. So if you know, take advantage of it. So Tabitha comes from an incredible family of artists, and many of you, I think, know this family or know of the family. Tony Vevers, who passed away this last year, was very involved with the Fine Arts Work Center and the Provincetown Art Association Museum. I think he was on the board here and exhibition committees here, and had his work shown here and curated shows here, and was a painter and a very distinguished educator and artist. Elsbeth Halverson, who's here tonight, Tabitha's mother, is herself a very distinguished exhibiting artist, sculptor, and makes boxes. Tabitha's sister Stephanie is a filmmaker, videographer. Her husband Daniel Rinaldi is a conceptual photographer. So there's a wonderful cross-pollination of art influences among the Vevers family, the extended family. As Bob said in his introduction, Tabitha's work is part of a contemporary discourse about social and political issues as they intersect with the personal. I think that's very true of Tabitha. The work does come from a very personal springboard of her own life experiences, but she's also very aware of and reacts to what's going on in the world. Again, whether it's a political issue or a social issue or an environmental issue that concerns her, it enters her work and intersects with the personal part of her life. And it is output in these incredible paintings and sometimes three-dimensional objects, which I will be showing you. And again, she has said very publicly on many occasions that she is interested in reclaiming the female image from art history and representing the woman from a woman's perspective. So we will see that. I guess I would ask Grace to get the lights and we'll go to the slides. Okay, so there we go. Some of the installation shots I'm showing you are actually from the Curator installation, which I don't know if any of you got up there to see it, but so if it looks different, that's why. And actually at Curator there were a few colored walls. So this is the series called Secular Icons, which really starts the show. The show covers roughly 20 years of work. And in these early pieces, Tabitha is really showing her love for pre-Renaissance paintings and literally icons. In her case, she shows the name secular because they're not meant to be religious paintings. But she has always been influenced by not only the style, the technique of pre-Renaissance and sometimes Mannerist painting, but also in the intensity and the spiritual nature of them and their ability to tell a story. And I show you this slide, you see 3 of them, but if you look at the one in the middle, you also see that it's open, and I'll show you just as an example, a comparative. This is, of course, a 14th century triptych, and very often these paintings had, panels that opened, and they were painted on the inner side of the panel and when the panels were closed. And in this case, of course, it's the story of Christ and Mary. And here is that one painting that you saw in the middle, The Cure, a novella, where you're seeing it here both open and closed. When you see it in the gallery, I think it's kept closed, and it probably says do not touch, because obviously if many people open and close it, it's going to potentially damage the work, so I'm giving you the opportunity to see it. It's a very complex painting, and it's really about what was going on in Tabitha's life at the time. You see a young woman in the bedroom, the bed seems to be levitating, all these other objects are sort of entering the room. It's very illusionistically painted, so that you've got this frame with a toothbrush on it leading you into the room. And it's very theatrical. That's something I would say is true of all of Tabitha's work. It's very theatrical work. She sets the stage for something to happen, and it raises the level of excitement as you sort of enter this theatrical space. There's also usually a very shallow picture plane. This series has probably a little more depth than some of the later series, where everything's pushed forward and is happening close to the front of the picture. And when you see the panel open on the left, you see it gets quieter, and the ladder and the paintbrush that are standing up really are a reference to choosing the path of art. I think this was at a time of her life where she was seeking direction, and the path of art was the one that seemed to offer the way that she chose to go. Also at this time, again, the female is often the protagonist in these pieces. It's not necessarily exactly Tabitha. It doesn't necessarily look like Tabitha, although I'd say sometimes the figures do. But the figure is really more a general protagonist of a strong woman struggling with the problems of life and often overcoming them. And in this case, in Lightening the Load, you can see that she's burdened down by all kinds of objects. I don't know how much you can see from where you're sitting, but there's fire, there's a boat on her back, there's a cinder block, which is actually 3-dimensional, which is she's thrown off. The Provincetown Monument is back there. Can you see that? I'm not sure, but anyway, so she's got these things tied to her back, and she's, again, these are aspects of her life that she's struggling with, but she is, I think she's not only surviving, but she's overcoming these battles. Often in the paintings, of course, gold leaf is something that is used throughout the work from the early time to the present, and that's another reference to pre-Renaissance work and icons. And in general, the figures tend to be stylized. They're not meant to be naturalistic. She doesn't work from a model. She actually has said that working from a model, she finds that drains it of the emotional intensity that she's seeking. So the figures are somewhat deliberately awkward, which again comes from pre-Renaissance art. Talking about this difficult subject matter that Tabitha addresses, and I think in her case the personal becomes the universal. And she does this through narrative representation. In this case, when we talk about rape, which is a very strong image, she uses the mermaid as the victim. She's obviously been violated. You see her mermaid tail split apart. You see the bones. She, seems to be in perhaps pain or despair. And even the gold leaf in the painting seems cracked, as if the world is a sadder place. So she addresses this topic head on. And remember, this is from 1992. I would say that Tabitha is certainly not alone in being a contemporary artist who's addressing social and political issues, there are many. And there are many women who have done this. One aspect of contemporary art that I think Tabitha's work fits into is something that I've called menacing beauty, but that's just my term. There are lots of other terms. In artists who work in a very intimate, detailed, and beautiful technique, as Tabitha does. Surfaces are beautiful, things are painted and rendered beautifully, the gold leaf is luscious, but she's often dealing with difficult subject matter. So it pulls you in by its beauty, and then it shocks you perhaps, or at least makes you think by what you're actually seeing. Shortly after the last painting was The Wounded Lover, which is on the right, which is a reference to the Saint Sebastian figure. So I'm showing you a painting of Saint Sebastian from the 15th century. The typical image of Saint Sebastian is pierced with arrows, and in this case, the more contemporary reference for Tabitha is of AIDS and how AIDS was ravaging a population, and including friends of hers, and certainly is something that people out on the Cape were very aware of. In the mid-90s, Tabitha moved away from the secular art icons, which were small in size and much more intimate, to the one larger series of work that she's done in the last 20 years, and these are the Flesh Memories. And you're seeing two of them here. The Flesh Memories were made between 1993 and 1997, and the images are actually embodied in the flesh. The torso is pushed up to the surface. Certainly, if you look at the one on the right, instead of looking into a scene, a theatrical scene or a window where you're seeing a figure involved in a activity, you're seeing only part of the woman's torso. And embedded, as I said, in the flesh of the painting, so to speak, you'll often find other images. So on the shaped painting on the left, which is called Luna, you actually see a little heart-shaped bubble with a male figure in it. And then, of course, on the right, you have the eggshells. One of the things that I think is key to Tabitha's work is that she's always, or often tries to wed the imagery to the material she uses. And we'll see more of that when she's using bone and ivorine. But the surfaces of the Flesh Memories, for me, are really flesh-like in the way they're painted. And these deal with even more personal images about fertility and sexuality and procreation. So as I said, when the idea about melding the material with the subject matter is something that is carried on in the next series that she did, which is called A History of Cloning, the Creation of Eve. Inspired by stories of Dolly the sheep, the first cloned sheep, she started to think about Eve and how Eve was created from Adam's rib, which is bone. So she did these delicate pieces on Scrimshaw, and as you probably know, Scrimshaw is a craft developed by whalers in the early 1800s of carving designs into whalebone or ivory. So she used that same technique, and it was important to her to have 12 of these, which represented Adam's 12 ribs. And the picture of Eve she took from Lucas Cranach's painting. This is only one half of the painting of Adam and Eve, and you can see the pose of the figure is what Tabitha was referring to. So using a sharp knife, you carve that the way the Scrimshaw is done. You carve into the surface, and then you brush over it with an ink to bring out the color. And these are just, as an example, I'm guessing everyone here has seen Scrimshaw, especially, again, out on the Cape, but just in case you haven't, these are some examples from the Whaling Museum's collection. But just to go back, there was a whole series that she did using bones, where for her, there was this resonance to meld, as I said before, the image with the material to make it even more meaningful. And And that led to the next series, which were called Women and Knives. And those are, she chose, I think there were 20 in the series, 20 knives. Women who have used knives in senseless acts of violence and heroism. And she chose a variety of women, women in history, mythology, women in pop culture. And again, she was doing the Scrimshaw on the bones, and of course she made them into knife shapes. So again, they're knives, they are made out of bone, so they reference murder and killing and bones. And some of the women were Judith from Judith and Holofernes, Lizzie Borden. So she went from art history to contemporary and, as I said earlier, popular culture. And the way we showed them at the Decortiva, where there was a bit more wall space, were on the wall, as you can see here. And here in Provincetown, as you'll see, or if you've already seen, they're in freestanding cases, which actually is a nice way to see them because then you can see the labels on the back, if any of you have looked at these, because Tabitha has labeled them all on the back. So you get a better view of the backside of these pieces. And here's a detail of Judith and Holofernes on the left and Lizzie Borden on the right. And the way that Tabitha has presented them in these beautiful cases, just to go back again to remind you, they both have this reference to coffins and to knife cases, the way you might display a fancy knife if you had a collection. So again, there's this constant doubling, tripling of referencing that comes through. But she's also continues to re-examine women throughout history, real women as well as mythological figures and popular culture figures. And she's not necessarily celebrating these women who have, some of whom have committed crimes, but just bringing them forward, re-examining them. A very different series followed the Women and Knives. I think she has said that there was a point where she was starting to feel rather oppressed by the series herself, because she also does a lot of research in all her work. So she's very careful about researching her sources, and she was reading books about some of these women. Carla Faye Tucker, actually, the axe murderer, was someone that really encouraged her to start the series. Anyway, at the same time, surprisingly, she was also gathering stories that friends had told her about flying dreams. And so she had been collecting these flying dreams. You know, I don't know, has everyone here had a flying dream? I mean, I'm not sure that I have. I think when you see these, you kind of wish that you had, and you wish that Tabitha had painted your flying dream, because they're also wonderful. And they're probably the most lighthearted pieces that she's done that I'm familiar with. So the format, though, the way she created them was in the format of an ex voto painting. An ex voto painting was a painting made as an offering of thanks to a holy personage, to thanking them for an answered prayer. So they were very often done by commissioned by religious families, again, to thank someone for recovering from an illness or an accident. So Tabitha thought, well, people are giving thanks for having these wonderful flying dreams. So she decided to use the same format, paints on metal. Most of the ex-votos are on metal, not always. And in this case, you can see it's oil and silver lease on galvanized steel. And then she also, which is something that is always true of the ex-votos, includes the text of what happened. So I don't know if you can read. Can you read this one, or should I try to read it to you? Let's see. I was at an Ivy League university in a museum of brilliant blue lapis lazuli artifacts. Suddenly, my grandma's silver serving tray hovered before me. I took off my pants and underpants, climbed on the tray, and flew out to the campus green. Students lazed about, but didn't even look twice as I flew by. I flew high to hide my nakedness, then joined an outdoor yoga class from my levitating perch, and felt close to ecstasy up on the great blue sky. I raised my arms up like wings, balancing without holding onto the tray, and soared up into the air. I did flips and relished this new freedom of movement. After a while, I flew back to the museum to look for my underwear. This is one of my favorite ones, which is why I chose to put this in. And I'm sure if you go through the show, you can read them all. But I also love the attention to detail. And I also should say that these are not Tabitha's dreams; these are other people's dreams that they have told to her, and she interprets them visually the way she chooses. It's not as if the person says to her, "Oh, you've got to show me this way or that way." This is sort of, she comes up with them. And I just love the way, again, in this case, of course, it's the same woman. You see her at the beginning of her flight and then mid-flight. So the way she's representing the passage of time, the lapis lazuli museum that you get a peek into, the yoga class up on the hill, and then the Ivy League University in the back. I told her I think it looks more like a prison, but maybe that's her. She did go to Yale, so maybe she has some feelings about that. But anyway, I think it's very lighthearted and just wonderfully expressive, the way the flying dreams are represented. These are 2 ex-votos. Just to show you, and there are many examples. The one on the left, the slide's a little blurry, but it is actually in the collection of Wellesley College at the Davis Museum. And it's actually in view now in a show, so if anyone goes there, you can see it. But the purpose of it was the woman, it's hard to see, but there's a woman on the bed, there are all these people gathered around her who had successful surgery for breast cancer. So this was commissioned to thank, to give thanks for successful breast cancer surgery. And on the one on the right, I included the text. Dolce's mother-in-law seemed to be bewitched. A priest advised the beleaguered daughter-in-law to give the angry woman tea made from holy water. Her prayers were answered and her promise kept with this ex voto. So she's thanking the Lord for helping with her angry mother-in-law. And here are 2 more of Tabitha's. I won't try to read these because it's too blurry, but the monastery, basically about a man who is flying in this monastery, and they're all looking up at him, somewhat amazed, and a woman in levitation who's levitating over a city street. So the next series, and I'm doing this pretty much chronologically to give you a walk through Tabitha's work, are The Lover's Eyes. And again, Tabitha was inspired by something from history. I should say that even though my talk is showing you all the artistic sources, or many of the artistic sources that she uses, I just want to emphasize that Tabitha also uses her own imagination greatly. I mean, all artists are inspired by the past. Everybody is inspired by the past, whether we acknowledge it or not. We're influenced by what happened before us, by what we see, by what we read, by who we know. And I think in Tabitha's case, she's made some very direct references to art history, but she's got this incredible imagination that brings it to life and reinvents it and reinterprets it in a way that it was not seen before. The Lover's Eyes is a series that she's painted on ivorine, which is a synthetic form of ivory. And I'm showing you 2 examples here. The eye that she chooses, and I'll give you the historical source in a minute, but the eye that she chooses are from paintings throughout art history. So the one on the left is the eye of Lee Miller after a Man Ray painting. And on the right, it's the eye of Madame LeBlanc from a painting by Ang. And these are, of course, very tiny and often presented in decorative frames. But the source of the lover's eye, it was a tradition of eye portraiture which first appeared in England during the late 18th century, supposedly when the Prince of Wales, who later became George IV, sent his lover a miniature portrait of his eye as a secret memento. And then the practice of keeping the identity of a lover secret through the exchange of eye paintings, became popular in England, Russia, and France, and continued into the early 19th century. The paintings were often worn as brooches, rings, or in lockets tucked away under clothing. So this was the idea that, you know, your lover could send you this and you could have it close to you but not reveal to the world who your lover was. And Tabitha actually said she first heard about this tradition on Antiques Roadshow. So you can get this information from anywhere. So I'm just showing an example of, I don't know the dates of these, but earlier they were obviously pins of some sort or lockets in the top one. And there was the image of the woman with her eye, and here's. So these slides show you the source material for Tabitha's. And the way they're displayed here and at Decorativa is there are 3 that are framed separately, but then there's a big wall case with a red painted background that has a lot of the eyes because they're so small and intimate. And she's also, by choosing, again, it's all women, she's reclaiming the gaze. You know, throughout art history in particular, women used to be mostly represented by male artists, and here she's representing the women. She's sort of choosing them and choosing them for these eye paintings. So there's from Leonardo da Vinci's Ginevra da Vinci, the eye, and from Bronzino, Eleonora's eye above. And again, sometimes they're framed in these beautiful tintype frames. Yet another format, endlessly inventive. What's more natural for someone who grew up primarily in Provincetown, wandering the beach, than the seashell? And I think probably most of us at some point in our life, if we spent time on the beach, collected shells, maybe painted shells, you know, made sculptures with shells. So, you know, at this point, Tabitha decided that the shell was a perfect vessel for painting. It's intimate, like much of her work. It accepts the paint readily. The gold leaf really created this little shrine-like format for her to work with. It's like a shrine in itself when it's painted. You know, if you could all hold these shells in your hand, which you can't do because they're on the wall and they belong to other people, but you know, they give you that sense of intimacy, so they work beautifully for these paintings. The one on the left, Rapture. So a lot of them have to do with, you know, the female is usually the protagonist who's involved sometimes with sea creatures, in this case, sometimes on her own, in positions of abandon, rapture, despair. For Tabitha, the lobster was a representative of the male because of the hard ecoskeleton, and again, a reference to the differences between females and males and how they relate to one another. And after she got involved in painting shells, she discovered later that there was a 12th century tradition in Japan of painting shells called kaiawase. And so I'm showing you one of those on the right. This one represents the story of Genji from, again, something like the 10th century. But they use these painted shells not only as a narrative way of telling stories, but it was actually a game they played. It was a matching game that they played. So it's an example of Tabitha actually creating the series and then finding out afterwards that there was an earlier precedent for them in Japan. This one is a very large shell which sits on a pedestal in the show called Wild Ride. So again, the sort of female kind of riding, perhaps playing with or battling this, is that a squid? Sea creature? That's a squid, isn't it? Thank you. I want to make sure I'm not saying the wrong thing. And again, how the gold and the shape of the shell create this perfect environment for this little scene. There are also a number of these female figures who sport tails. And in this case, again, it's as if the lioness figure, the female figure, is in her own cave, perhaps sleeping. And also continuing, Tabitha in this series continues to address issues, environmental issues, social issues. This one, as you can see, is Big Fish Eat Little Fish, a parable for our times. And that's quite, I think, clear. Doesn't need any explanation. And the last series, and the series that's still ongoing in Tabitha's work, is the Eden series. The Eden series is about a world gone awry. It's really post-Edenic. In other words, it's post the Garden of Eden. She started the series, she said she was doodling. She did this amoeba-like figure, and then the amoeba-like figure became this conjoined male-female figure that shared various traits. And as you can see, multiple breasts, multiple legs, and genitalia. They're asexual and bisexual. There's a real blend. These are small paintings, absolutely beautifully painted. You see the gold sky, the stylized rocks, which we've seen in other paintings. The stylized water with the ripples of water, and Tabitha has said that these ripples that she uses a lot around people really are like the aura from the person, emanating from the person. But in addition to the mutant bodies or the hybrid bodies of these figures, there's also something going on in the landscape. There's these big, is it rain or acid rain that's falling from the sky? There's sort of smokestacks that are spewing smoke. So there's something wrong with the environment. And so she's dealing with a number of different issues in this series. Reference to mutation, cloning, environmental pollution, blending of genders, and the title, as you can see, is Amoeba Yuba. Another one from this series, which is called Rei Morse, is based on Masaccio's 15th century painting of the expulsion from the Garden of Eden, and you can see that the male figure is similar to the pose that Tabitha chose for her male figure. There's a fire in the distance, destruction representing destruction. Again, the smokestack in the background, and this figure is remorseful that, that we as humans have perhaps let the universe get to the state that it's in today. And in this case, the tail between the legs is really more like a shameful tail, whereas the tails that she often uses for her women figures is more of a power tail, I would guess. I want to say something because Helen Miranda Wilson, who's an artist and a friend of Tabitha's, is here in the audience. I first heard this term face painting when referring to Helen's work. A very small, intimate painting where you had to get your face up into it to look at it. I don't know if you invented that term, Helen, but...
Face size.
Face size. Well, I guess I extrapolated that to face painting. And I think that this series in particular of Tabitha's are like that, because they are small, they're intimate, they are so beautifully painted, and you do need to get up close to see what's going on. And actually, one of the things that Tabitha said, and this was quoted in an article from 2007 about attracting viewers, I like to slap them on the head with something small. So I think it's that thing that, again, you're drawn in by the beauty, but then you kind of see, maybe not everything is right in this world. Another one of the Eden paintings on the left, the Three Graces. And again, of course, in this case, you've got the bodies, but they're not developed the way a body should be. There's eyes and ears and nose replacing the top part of the body. And of course, the reference in the Three Graces, is to, there are many, many painted images of the Three Graces. I'm just showing you Raphael's painting on the right. And another Eden figure, Trouble in Paradise. Again, quite clear. Another hybrid figure with 3 legs. And is this Eve holding the snake? And again, a very clear reference to what's going on in the environment. And so in this type of painting, the gold, instead of becoming precious, I think, becomes almost like it's tarnished. It's, the sky has perhaps turned gold because of environmental pollution. And you also see in the water a bottle floating and other junk, other ways of polluting the environment. And finally, and this is the last slide I'm showing you, she's done a number of paintings with this Madonna-like figure. This one she calls Marsupadonna, a reference to a marsupial creature, which, like a kangaroo that has a pouch, which is where its young are nursed until they're old enough to survive on their own. And you've got, so she's a Madonna, but she's herself is, again, a mutant figure. And you can see the drop of milk feeding that one baby, and the other, of course, is suckling. And I think we come full circle because, again, you've got this single female protagonist standing in a shallow space on a stage-like thing. Even the way the sky is represented looks like curtains pulling back. And I think it's actually a hopeful painting because even though we are facing all kinds of problems in our society, certainly in our environment, this woman, this creature, is procreating. She is having babies. There is a future suggested in the work. And I find these in particular to be very, very beautiful and moving paintings. So I encourage you to spend some time in the show if you haven't already. And I'm here and I'm happy to answer any questions you might have. Thank you. Do you have any questions? Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you. Oh, yes. Sure.
I was just wondering, the process of gold leaf, is the oil applied on top of the gold leaf, or is it integrated side by side?
I don't think, I'm sure oil is not applied on top, but I'm not an artist myself, so
It can be applied.
it can be, but I don't think Tabitha,
No, she doesn't.
she doesn't, so it can be, but she doesn't. Yes.
Where did Tabitha study art anywhere, and if so, where did she study?
Yeah, I didn't really give her biography, I apologize, but she went to Yale.
Oh, okay.
Which I think I briefly mentioned, and she also was at Skowhegan, which is a wonderful art colony up in Maine, and she was a fellow at the Fine Arts Work Center here in Provincetown. So, yes.
I'd also like to suggest that even if you've seen the show after this talk, the gallery is open. We might, wander in there to look at the work
Sure.
now with your perspective.
Absolutely.
I wonder where she got the idea of putting the man and the woman and all that together like that, and 3 legs and all.
Well, what she had said was she was doodling one night, and she made this amoeba-like figure that was conjoined, and that sort of led to the whole series. But I think, she also has been very aware of things happening in the news, and not only issues about the environment, but issues about sexual identity and gender identity, and you name it. She's very aware of what's out there and happening, and so it enters her work. All right. Well, I'm happy to head over to the gallery. Is that okay with the staff here to do that? And if anyone wants to come with me, please.